All right, we're back with another episode of App Stories. This week's episode is brought to you by New Relic and Instabug. Federico Vitici, how you doing?
Hello, I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing all right too. I'm doing all right. We're gonna do something that has become a bit of a tradition. We're going to do a Shortcuts wish list 2022 edition. We did this last March 1st of 2021. We're not quite to March yet, but I thought it would be a good time since we've been talking about Shortcuts a lot. There's been a lot of beta updates that are changing things in Shortcuts. It's getting a little more stable. And I thought we could look back at how things turned out with our wishes last year, but then share some new wishes. What do you think?
All right, why don't you start? I think that's a good plan. Why don't you start with all the things that we got, all the things that have a green check mark in our notes. And
it's a very short list.
It's not a long list at all.
Fortunately, past me actually put down every one of our wishes in the show notes from last year, so people can follow along by finding that episode on March 1st, 2021. And the very first one, though, on our list we got, which is block folding. You can fold up your if statements and things like that, all your loops, to compress your shortcut and make it a little easier to move things around. So we got that, which is really nice. The next one I want to mention is we wished for more colors and more icons. We kind of got this, Federico.
We kind of did. There are more glyphs.
It's not quite, I don't think. The reason I put the rightward facing hand here, Federico, one, because I like that you didn't get that right in the Jeremy's Unconnected.
Yeah, it's
also,
worst emoji ever. Yeah.
Worst emoji ever. The rightwards facing hand indicates that we kind of got it, because I think we were hoping for more than what we got. We got some more glyphs.
We didn't get the new colors,
right?
But we did get more icons for shortcuts. Like there are more glyphs that you can use for your shortcut, which you're going to see in the shortcut library or when you add a shortcut to the home screen. So this is a partial get maybe for us. But the colors are still boring, and I know what we were asking for, like actually having more freedom to use whatever vibrant color we want, and we
a color picker,
imagine that, but we did not get it. So we got some new icons. So this is a partial get. Yeah,
I think multitasking actions is kind of a partial too.
Yes, because we did get the ability on iPad to create split views with support for split view sizes.
Right.
As well as the option to open something in slide over. But what we didn't get is the ability to control specific windows of specific apps. So if you have an app like Safari with multiple windows open, Shortcuts doesn't have any knowledge of multiple windows at all. It just defaults to the last used window. This, however, is in direct opposition to what is happening on Shortcuts for Mac, where you have now extensive actions for multitasking and window control. Those actions were super buggy, especially the Find Windows action.
Yeah.
Super slow in the first release of macOS Monterey. It has since been updated to be much, much faster than before. So those are getting better. But now you have basically this inconsistency between the actions that you have on macOS Monterey, which are, they get the job done. You can do split views, you can do proper window control, you can get a list of all your open windows. It's nice, but you have effectively nothing on iPad compared to that. So yes to the Mac stuff, but this needs to be consistent.
Yeah, I agree with that. And the next one, though, we did get quite a bit in terms of better Files app integration. And that was in large part because of the automator actions that were brought over from the Mac to the iPad. So we have that. We didn't get, however, I think, quite as extensive file control as we probably had hoped last year, but it was still a pretty nice improvement in 2021.
Yeah. What else did we get? The list. I think this is the last item on the list. Should we just repeat last year's episode?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
well, I think we have some new ones. I mean,
We do.
we've got.
We do.
I think we're gonna have to renew some of these requests, but I do think we have some new ones that we can add in here as well.
We did get the ability to run personal automations on a schedule with like.
That's true.
And now, even in 15.4, you will be able to turn off the notify when run toggle, which means an automation that has a schedule can run in the background. Now it can fully run in the background without manual confirmation, and it can run in the background without even telling you that it's running in the background. So that's cool. You still get a summary. So I've disabled all of my alerts for my personal automations that run on a schedule. And now they run throughout the day, dozens of times per day, and they never notify me anymore, which is great, but I still get a summary. Apple still wants to tell you, hey, look, and the summary literally says, 20 automations recently ran in the background.
Yeah, I know. They ought to just get rid of that, because that is not. I'm glad that we don't get the interruption of the notification itself, but that little summary isn't particularly helpful because it doesn't even tell you which automation ran.
Yeah. All right, so that was the part of the list. That was it.
And I guess it it's understandable in the sense that shortcuts came out for the Mac, and that was Apple's focus in 2021. And so a lot of the things we were wishing for were more particular to the app itself on iOS and the iPad. And we got something completely different. I mean, we did wish for it on the Mac, but we got, a focus on the Mac in 2021. And I'm really hoping that in 2022, we can kind of go back to that list that we had last year and get some of those things across both the Mac and the other platforms as well.
Yeah. So why don't we go through the list, and we can renew some of our previous picks. We can add some new context around them. But I also feel like what you said, John, like we have some new wishes, we have some new items based on what Shortcuts has become now. That it's Swift UI, a big rewrite on all platforms, and also available on macOS.
Right. And I think it goes without saying, too, that we do want more bug fixes. I mean, I think Apple has done a commendable job of tightening up shortcuts relatively quickly since it came out in a pretty rough form last fall. And so that's fantastic. But there's still room. I mean, I still have issues sometimes with dragging actions on the iPad and things like that, where things get all out of sorts.
Yeah.
And I kind of give up or go to my Mac or something like that. So
there
are things that need to be fixed. And I had some issues with variables recently too, where if I dragged an action in a particular order, it would adopt a variable from a previous step, and then I couldn't change it for some reason. Have you ever seen that?
I have seen a version of this where, it's kind of different. When you drag an action, and you think you're dragging a specific action, but then when you drop it, it becomes another action.
Oh, I think I have seen this.
I'm not kidding.
Super confusing.
And you got to close the shortcuts editor and reopen it. The other nasty bug that I've seen lately, if a menu comes up, like you have a choose from menu action, and you got to choose an item from a menu, but you tap outside of the menu, right? This happens on iPad, where the menu comes up in the middle of the screen, but you can tap outside of it. The shortcut hangs, and it never completes. And you got to force quit shortcuts not once but twice from the multitasking switcher. Yes, you got to force quit it twice.
Yeah, there are scenarios where it hangs on the Mac quite a bit too, and you have to do that sort of thing to get rid of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's room. There's definitely things that have to happen to tighten it up more, but we're going to focus more on features today.
Yeah.
This episode of App Stories is brought to you by New Relic. If you're a software engineer, you've been there. It's 9 p.m. and you're finally unwinding from work, but then your phone buzzes with an alert. Something is broken, and your mind's already racing at what it could be. Is it global? Is it the server? Is it the network? Who knows what it might be? Now the whole team is scrambling from tool to tool and messaging person after person to find and fix the issue. That won't happen if you use New Relic. New Relic combines 16 different monitoring products that you normally buy separately, so engineering teams can see across their entire software stack in a single place. More importantly, you can pinpoint issues down to the line of code, so you know exactly why the problem happened and can resolve it quickly. That's why dev and ops teams at DoorDash, GitHub, Epic Games, and more than 14,000 other companies use New Relic to debug and improve their software. Whether you run a cloud-native startup or a Fortune 500 company, it takes just 5 minutes to set up New Relic in your environment. That next 9 p.m. call is just waiting to happen. Get New Relic before it does, and you get access to the whole New Relic platform and 100 gigabytes of data free forever with no credit card required. Just go to newrelic.com/appstories. That's NEWRELIC.com/appstories. Head on over to newrelic.com/appstories and check out the details today. Our thanks to New Relic for their support of the show. I really think we should start with the Mac since that's what Apple did last year. I really want to, because I really want proper Safari support. I mean, this is something, this was one of the very first things when I opened shortcuts for the Mac, the very first time, one of the first things I tried was to get the details of an article, because given what we do, that's an action that you and I use in an awful lot of shortcuts, and it just doesn't work on the Mac. And, you know, really, unless you're using AppleScript, you really can only get the URL of the frontmost window. That's basically what you're limited to.
There's no integration whatsoever with Safari in terms of like tabs or selections or properties of the current page. And there's so much that Apple could do with Safari on the Mac where you have this concept of the frontmost tab, for example, which is not something that you can necessarily do on iPad. You have this long legacy of Safari's integration with AppleScript that I think it absolutely should have a visual component, a visual equivalent in shortcuts. At the very least, to have, to make sure that your existing Safari shortcuts from iOS and iPadOS can keep working on the Mac, which is really, really surprising, honestly, that they achieved near perfect compatibility for all actions, except the ones for the most important app on their platforms.
Yeah, and those actions are in there too. Things like, which is why I just thought that it was a bug originally and that it would eventually work, but it never has. So yeah, it's unfortunate. I hope that gets changed.
The other thing is the share sheet on the Mac.
Yeah,
right?
that's near and dear to my heart too. It's a very close second is the share sheet, because that's one of the main input methods for iOS or iPadOS.
Yes. Sometimes you just want to run a shortcut from the share sheet. It's become a staple of the iOS and iPadOS experience. There are so many nice things about it in terms of like in shortcuts, in settings, you can say this shortcut I just want to see on the App Store, or I just want to see it when I share some documents with it. Like you have those controls, and it's become like I'm very accustomed now to do things like when I share an app from the App Store, I see two of my App Store based shortcuts, but when I share some text from Safari, I see something else in the share sheet. And
right.
that integration needs to happen on the Mac as well. There's a bigger problem here, which is the share sheet on the Mac needs to be redone completely because it doesn't support the same layout, the same types of extensions as iOS and iPadOS. So I think one of the big features for iOS 16 and whatever comes after Monterey, what are they going to call it? Mammoth or Sequoia or something similar?
Maybe.
Whatever comes next, there needs to be a unified story around the share sheet. Basically, the thing you see when you share stuff on Apple platforms.
I mean, right now, because right now they're called the same thing, but as far as I can tell, they're completely different. Under the hood, they're completely different.
Yeah. What else do we want to see on the... Well, there's
personal automation.
Yes, I was about to mention. On the Mac, I really want to see automations because right now, there's no, like, the automation tab in Shortcuts does not exist on the Mac at all. Like, there's literally no automation section in the sidebar of the Shortcuts for Mac app. There are ways to run shortcuts based on triggers on the Mac, but they involve third-party utilities or cron-based tasks in the shell, or external tools like Better Touch Tool. And those are great ways to set up a schedule, but really, this is already a system feature on the two other platforms where Shortcuts is available. It should be on the Mac too.
Yeah, it should be. It's interesting to me that we do have home automations, but they're only in the Home app. And and they showed up there the year before Shortcuts came to the Mac. And you would have thought that was in preparation to bring them to the Shortcuts app itself, but they're not there. I mean, they are in the Home app, but we don't have them in the Shortcuts app, and we don't have personal automations at all.
Yeah. So automations need to happen on the Mac. And while we're on the topic of automations, more broadly speaking, I will ask for more types of triggers and tweaks to existing triggers. So for the refinements, I would like to set the same automation to support multiple schedules. So right now I have a shortcut that I want to run 12 times a day. That means I need to set up 12 separate personal automations for the same shortcut that I want to run on a schedule, but multiple times. Now that seems inefficient, right? I should just be able to set up one personal automation that says, do this, and the schedule should be multiple schedules within the same automation. So let me set up one automation and say, okay, run this at 1 p.m., 2 p.m., 3 p.m., and so forth. Yeah,
or maybe it's just something that's like a repeating task where it's like run this every 3 hours or run this every 6 hours, whatever it happens to be.
Don't let me set it up 20 times.
No, those are I don't do that a lot because of that. It's just really tedious to deal with that.
Cannot even duplicate them, and you cannot share automations. And they don't sync. Like, there's a whole lot of work that needs to be done with automations. Let them sync. Let me share them. Let me duplicate them. Let me set up more trigger, like more multiple and more triggers. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done there. Speaking of new triggers, there's two of them that I would really like to see. When a calendar event is due and when a reminder is due. Especially the calendar event one. It used to be, I think it's still possible, on macOS, you could run an automated workflow when a calendar event was due. This was
you can. You can run AppleScript too.
You can, right? And I think you still can.
You can.
This needs to become a native automation trigger. I mean, we have more exotic triggers already, right? We have like get an email from someone trigger. So a calendar event being due, I think it would make for an excellent trigger.
I want to talk about the app itself, and I want to talk about the app on the Mac.
All right.
And particularly the UI. Now, if you're on an iPad and you've got the right-hand sidebar and you're looking at your directory of apps that have actions, you can go through that list, runs the complete top to bottom of the iPad. And when you tap on one of the apps, then all the actions slide in, so you can see all those at once as well. On the Mac instead, you have this little tiny bit of a list that shows at the top of the apps and then the actions below it. I'd like this to work more like the iPad because if you have a lot of apps installed, it's too much scrolling.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I agree. So I wrote about this. I don't want to repeat the story here. I had an article on Mac Stories called "The Curious Case of Apple's Missing App Integrations for Shortcuts."
Right.
Basically, the article was about not like how Apple likes to add new actions, just like they like, for example, to add watch faces to the watch. They like adding new, but they rarely update the existing stuff. Just like they rarely update the existing watch faces. I wish that Apple updated and was more disciplined in updating the existing actions. there are a ton of actions in shortcuts that came out years ago and they were never touched again. For example, the notes actions do not support rich text or file attachments at all. The find photos action does not support any of the new intelligent parameters that you can search for in photos, like people, places, objects. None of that stuff is supported in the action. This is a bigger story about like how different teams at Apple should prioritize actions for their apps in shortcuts and make sure that every year shortcuts integration becomes one of those boxes that you need to check. Just like having support for a retina display or a new iPhone form factor is one of those boxes, one of those requirements. Having a modern shortcuts equivalent of your system feature, that should also be a requirement. And I would like to see some updates to this. I would like to see new actions, but I would also like to see updates to old actions in shortcuts.
Yeah, I think that's something we should get to. But, it's even the situation's worse on the Mac too, because you have things like numbers actions on the iPhone and the iPad, but you don't have them at all on the Mac. There needs to be, now I guess it's understandable because shortcuts for the Mac is new, so there are fewer apps that support it, but there's a long way to go on the Mac, and really none of the Pro apps support shortcuts at this point either. And that would be nice to see, things like Logic and Final Cut and that sort of thing. This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Instabug. Building mobile apps presents challenges. There are bugs, crashes, and performance issues that can be a nightmare for developers. But what if you could not only detect all of these issues, but also get a holistic understanding of the quality of your app from your user's point of view? Instabug's lightweight SDK grabs all of the insights you need to build top quality apps through comprehensive bug and crash reports, performance monitoring, and real-time user feedback all in one SDK. With Instabug, you can continuously monitor and measure performance of your app as perceived by your users. Empower your users to report issues and ask questions seamlessly right from inside your app. Get all of the information you need about bugs, crashes, and other issues, and get them fixed in record time, all with a focus on privacy and security. And you don't need to worry about the hassle of switching to a new tool. It only takes a minute to integrate Instabug into your app, and it fits right within your workflow. With support for Jira, Slack, Trello, GitHub, Zendesk, and over 10 other popular tools. Join over 25,000 top mobile developers around the world who use Instabug to ship high-quality apps. Go to try.instabug.com/appstories today. Again, that URL is try.instabug.com/appstories, so they know you came from the show. Our thanks to Instabug for their support of App Stories.
I will mention that I would like to see more debugging tools. This was already a wish of mine from last year. We did get some improvements this year in iOS and iPadOS 15. The stop and output action, for example, really nice way to stop a shortcut and present some output to the user. You can even copy it to the clipboard. It's very nicely done. We also got a brand new system for checking for shortcut input that I was not expecting. So that was cool. But I cannot believe that it's still not possible to pause a shortcut at a specific point and see what's going on. Like, just let me pause an action and inspect the action to see what's going on. You still have to do this manually. Usually you do it by dragging in an alert and presenting the output that you want to present in the alert. This is the equivalent of not having like this sort of feature in an IDE and having to do print to console, like what's going on. Editorial had this 10 years ago. Like, pause and let me see what's going on.
Yep. See what the state of the variables are, all that kind of stuff. Exactly. And I also would like the ability to comment things out.
Yes.
Which I mean, I'd like to just like take, as you build a shortcut, some parts of it are working, some parts of it are not. And to figure out what's working and what's not, it would be really nice just to disable certain actions so that you can then rerun it and see if it was those that you turned off that are causing the problem. It's a simple debugging tool that you have in all IDEs. Instead, if you want to do that kind of thing, you have to basically delete those actions and then start over. And
you can't turn
that's
them
just
off.
inefficient.
Yeah, you should be able to just say disable or turn off, and
right. So they just get skipped and bypassed until you turn them back on.
Yeah. I would also like, speaking of creating shortcuts, I would like to copy and paste actions. That is possible, you may say, but
right.
For entire blocks of actions.
Yes, multiple actions.
Multiple actions at a time. Let me select multiple actions, copy and paste them around. Or if I copy an entire block, like if I copy an entire menu or an entire repeat loop that contains actions, when I go and paste it elsewhere in the shortcut or in another shortcut, paste it in its entirety. Not just the two actions that say repeat for each. Like paste all the actions inside of the block, between, the start and the end of the block.
I would like to see that pacing to be a little more intelligent too, because sometimes when you're dragging and dropping an action from one to the other, when you do it, you might be moving it from one shortcut where it's doing one thing, where they're basically doing the same thing in the two shortcuts. But when you drag it over, because those are technically different variables, all those variables have to be reset because they don't match up anymore. Do you follow what I'm saying? Yeah. Like intelligently figure out what I mean. Like if I'm grabbing a date in one shortcut, I drag this action over and I have things above it that are producing a date, switch it over to that variable so that I can get the date that way.
Yeah. I'm just gonna mention this. Everybody. I think everybody wants this. Let me disable the notification alert that pops down when you run a shortcut from the home screen.
Yeah, this is why I don't change my icons. I don't want to deal with that.
Especially problematic for folks who like to customize their icons using shortcuts. Even if you have like a one action shortcut that all it does is open an app. Like I do for Matter, for example, the Read Later app. I dislike the default icon very much.
I do too.
So I customized it with a red icon that I did in shortcuts. But when I tap that icon on my home screen, it needs to tell me every single time that I ran a shortcut. So just like Apple added the notify when run toggle in 15.4 for automations, let me use the same toggle for these kinds of shortcuts that I'm adding to the home screen.
I don't know how you tolerate that, Federico. I just can't handle that.
I know. It's I don't know either, but also I don't tolerate the Matter icon. So,
Yeah, no, I hear you. This was one from last year as well, but it really bears repeating this, that we need global hotkeys on the iPad and the iPhone,
yes.
Right? I mean, I guess not the iPhone, but...
Well, some people like to use their iPhones with a keyboard,
Yeah, I mean, it ought to be in both places, but I really mean the iPad, which is where I use a keyboard, but global hotkeys, because those are some of the most powerful keyboard shortcuts that I use on the Mac, and you can't do it on the iPhone or the iPad.
Yeah. More density in the shortcuts widget. I mentioned this before on App Stories. Let me put in more shortcuts in that widget. Those shortcuts are huge. Why can I think I should be able to put at least double the number of shortcuts in the same widget configurations. But also, why is there no Excel widget size on iPad? There's no Excel shortcuts widget on iPad. That needs to be done. Similarly, I want to be able to individually select the shortcuts that I want to show in a widget. Meaning, right now, it's all folder-based. But what if I want to show shortcuts from different folders in the widget? I guess I would like to be able to have a UI that is more similar to the Timery widget, for example, In the timery widget, if you want to show specific timers in the widget, you have a list and you tap the widgets you want to see, the timers you want to see, and you can check them off the list, and those are the timers you're going to see in the widget.
Yeah, that is a good idea. Another way to handle that would be to have tagging in shortcuts so that you could tag things like widget, right? So it could be both. It could be both tagged for your widgets and tagged for Club Mac Stories or something like that.
Exactly. Because right now, all the shortcuts widget does is it lets you pick a folder, and then it picks the top 4 or 8 shortcuts from that folder. And those are the shortcuts you see in the widget. But what if those are not the first 4 shortcuts? Just let me pick them manually, basically.
Well, and then the problem is when you create a new shortcut in that folder, it's at the top of the list.
It pushes off the other ones. Yes.
Right. And now it's on your widget, and you might not have wanted it there, so you got to move it around. Yeah, that's a problem.
All right. So I'm glad we agree.
Definitely.
So, and lastly, I will mention, I mentioned this a few minutes ago, but I will repeat this. Real multi-window support on iPad. That is something that I want to see in shortcuts on iPad OS. The shortcuts should be aware of multiple windows for the same app on the iPad. And I would like to combine that with the ability to do something like open these 2 specific windows. So that would allow me to have favorite combinations of apps, for example, to do things like, okay, it's Thursday afternoon, I'm working on app stories, open this specific craft window on the left and this specific iMessage window on the right side of the screen, for example. So having that granularity for Windows on iPad would be excellent. And my last sort of new wish this year is to have on iPhone and iPad what we already have on Monterey, which is the ability for apps to run shortcuts in the background. So on Monterey, there is a shell command that it's called shortcuts run that any app can invoke to run any shortcut in the background without launching the shortcuts app. There's a command line integration for shortcuts on the Mac. Now, obviously, there's no command line on iOS and iPadOS, but I think there should be an API for developers to let you run a shortcut in the background without the URL scheme. That should be an API the developers can adopt or adapt, I guess. They're not adopting you could adopt an API if you want to, but adapting an API, I think it makes more sense. There should be an API the developers can use to say, run this shortcut that exists in the Shortcuts app, but in the background. Run it without taking the user out of the app.
Yeah, that is a great idea. I'd like to close out with one that's maybe not a fully formed idea yet, but there is too much separation between shortcuts on the Mac and shortcuts on iOS and iPadOS. I'd like to be able to build my Mac shortcuts on my iPad, even if the apps that's actions that I'm using aren't on the iPad. They're a Mac only app. I'd like to still be able to build those on the iPad and then target the Mac and run them on the Mac even from the iPad. I'd like more integration between the platforms and awareness about the various devices that make up your Apple devices. All right, Federico, that's a good list. It's it's a long wish list. I hope we get even I hope we get even a small fraction of those, but we got a small fraction last year, and I'm a little dissatisfied with how we did last year. Even though we did get shortcuts for the Macs, which, very nice that we have that now and that it's firming up a lot now. But in any event, that's it for this week. I want to thank our 2 sponsors. It is New Relic and Instabug. You can subscribe to the show, the longer version that's ad-free, by going to appstories.plus. It comes out a day early, too, on Sundays. You can find me and Federico over at macstories.net and Club Mac Stories. Federico is at Fetici on Twitter and Instagram. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees. JOHNVOORHWS. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.